All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni and Higher Education webinar series. Um, I am Jenna Thompson, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and also a PhD student in the Prevention Science program at Washington State University. And today we're really excited to have Audrey Devost here with us to talk about her research and work. This webinar is being recorded currently, and the recording will be available on the NRCFAHE webpage listed here. That will be up and available for us in the next week or so. Closed captioning is available if you would like to be able to turn on closed captioning in the live transcript options of your Zoom menu. Our next scheduled webinar will be in November 15th, from noon to 1 p.m. Pacific time, and the presenter will be Sierra Collins, associate with her PhD from the University of Connecticut Human Development and Family Sciences Department. And her presentation is entitled Evaluation of 2 Georgia College Campus Support Programs for Students with Experience in Foster Care. So there will be presentation time, and then there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the presentation. But feel free to type questions into the chat throughout, and we'll have time to address those at the end. So with that, I will go ahead and turn the time over to Audrey Devost.
Thank you, Jenna. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. Let's see. All right. All right, so hello, everyone. Welcome to my webinar. The title of this presentation is Exploring the Intersections of Homeplace, Understanding Racial Identity Development for Black Women College Students with Foster Care Experiences. The title of this presentation is inspired by Bell Hooks' concept of homeplace. Homeplace refers to the construction of a safe place where Black people can affirm one another, and by doing so, heal the many wounds inflicted by racist domination. The Black woman experience in America is multidimensional, with intersecting forms of oppression. We navigate various structures in our lifetime, so this presentation is specifically about understanding how experiences in the foster care system shape the development of racial identity for Black women once they're in higher education. All right, so here are the components of my presentation. I'm just going to go over who I am and how I come to this work next, talking about the knowledge projects that have shaped this webinar, and then I'm going to talk about the theoretical approach, studying racial identity through a Black feminist lens, and then I'm going to go over the publication, so Racial Identity on the Margins from 2022, going over the origin stories of the women who make this publication, such Ada, Layla, and Serenity, and then going into my dissertation, Black Women Finding Homeplace, going into Belle's story a little bit. And then I have some research theory-centered implications for practice and policy implications. All right, so my name is Dr. Audrey Devost. I earned my PhD this past June from UCLA, and I attended Howard University for my undergraduate education. I'm currently serving as a postdoctoral fellow in the Ralph J. Bunche Center for African American Studies at UCLA. How I come to this work is quite interesting. I am a transracial adoptee. I was born in Atlanta and was adopted as soon as I was born. I grew up in the state of Vermont and have been on my own unique journey of understanding my racial identity development ever since. It was Black feminists like Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde who have given me the tools to understand how racial identity has evolved in my own life. And so supporting the development of racial identity among Black women in America is a political act of love and a tool for our collective survival. In doing this work, I am committed to continually making Black women who have existed at different points of the intersections visible. I'm dedicated to naming, defining, and speaking for ourselves. So getting to our topic of discussion today, racial identity development refers to the exploration of the extent to which people of color perceive themselves to share a common racial heritage with their ascribed racial group. The process of understanding one's racial identity is complex and is shaped by family dynamics, historical factors, life experiences, as well as social and political contexts. That being said, my knowledge projects do not confine the development of racial identity to be understood by moving across time and space in a linear fashion. As I said in the beginning, the Black woman experience is multidimensional with intersecting forms of oppression. And with that being said, I wanted to explore what the racial identity process can look like for Black women navigating various structures such as the foster care system. So what you see on the screen, these are the knowledge projects that have shaped the webinar. The main piece of scholarship is my 2022 publication titled Racial Identity on the Margins. This was a qualitative research study that explored the ways that Black women college students with experiences in the foster care system construct meaning of their foster care experiences and how these experiences have influenced their higher education experiences and the current status of their racial identity development. And the second knowledge project is my newly published dissertation. The title of my dissertation that I defended in June 2023 is titled Women Finding Homeplace, Intrasectional Analysis of Racial Identity Development on the HBCU Campus. One of the participants in my dissertation also had experiences in the foster care system, so I wanted to share her story with you all because her higher education experiences pose really insightful implications for social scientists, educators, social workers, and practitioners. And that brings me to the theoretical approach that I take in examining racial identity development in the lives of Black women. I do so through a Black feminist lens. Broadly, Black feminist thought is a long-standing intellectual tradition that functions as a critical social theory grounded in its commitment to justice for both U.S. Black women and other oppressed groups. The distinguishing features of Black feminist thought that my studies are grounded in includes the power of self-definition, the tension of linking experiences and ideas, and the use of dialogue in assessing knowledge claims. Intersectionality is also included in my Black feminist approach to encourage thinkers to consider the intergroup dynamics among the stories of these Black women college students with foster care experiences. Together, these frameworks allow the realities of participants to be understood within theories that have been created for the advancement of Black women. So back to the 2022 publication, the research questions that I posed were, how does being a Black woman with experiences in the foster care system impact a student's experience in higher education? And what kinds of knowledge do these women perceive as lessons that they acquired during their lifetime in the foster care system? So these questions were important to me because existing literature has documented racial identity development for Black women in higher education and identity development for foster youth in higher education. But research that connects these two topics and uses a Black feminist approach was extremely limited when I first conceptualized this work. So I wanted to connect these research fields to reconfigure the complexities of understanding Black women marginality through a theoretical framework that has been created and sustained, again, for the advancement of Black women. And so in using a Black feminist approach to construct this study, the lived experiences of these women are the subject of inquiry. I begin the findings of this study by presenting the participants' origin stories. I did this because the three themes that emerge from the coding process are interconnected in a way that traces their lived experiences. Serenity, Layla, and Ada are the women of racial identity on the margins. So starting with Serenity, Serenity was an undergraduate student who exited the foster care system as a transracial adoptee. In telling her adoption story, Serenity shared that she was 18 months old when she first entered the foster care system. Serenity lived in one foster care home from the age of 18 months to 3.5 years old. Serenity never went back to live with her biological mom. And when she was 3.5, Serenity moved in with a different family and she was officially adopted by them when she was 4 years old. Serenity remembers crying during her adoption party, explaining that she was nervous in front of people. And reflecting on her transition to college, she shared how she cried a lot on the first day of being on campus. Layla was raised through guardianship of her grandparents. Although Layla officially transitioned to living with her grandparents at the age of 14, she expressed that her grandparents' house had always been there for her to stay at in the event that anything happened or when she needed to stay somewhere when she was younger. As Layla navigated the transition to guardianship, she transferred high schools. Her experience in transferring high schools, she ended up she ended up attending a charter school where she met some of her closest friends that she still carries today. Layla recognized that her family played a part in how her friendships formed, and she expressed that these difficulties with her family influenced her appreciation for her friendships. And last but not least, we have Ada. Ada came to the United States when she was 7 years old from Nigeria. Ada and her younger brother lived with their maternal aunt and uncle and their 2 children during their first few years in the States. She described this environment to have really volatile fights, and one time it got out of hand. Ada and her brother were placed in a foster care home where the adults of that household would regularly foster children. Ada admired their relationship, and she expressed that she and her brother enjoyed their time in that home because she longed for a United States experience, and living in the foster care home served that desire. Throughout her childhood, she had switched homes through different relatives, and Ada changed schools as well in this process. Through these schooling experiences, Ada found a balance in her racial identity. She maintained her ethnic pride, and at the same time, she was open and excited to new American cultural experiences as it pertained to Black culture. And so digging deeper with the participants, I wanted to share aspects of what I learned in tracing their identity development. Ada and I spent time discussing hardships during her time in the foster care system, and she told me about a tense moment with a 17-year-old boy who was living in the same foster home. When Ada reflected on this memory, she expressed that she was grateful that nothing happened in that moment because it really could have been devastating. It taught her to be really optimistic about stuff and not let one experience cover the whole thing. She went on to explain how this story also represents an important marker of her racial identity. She expressed this tense moment served as a taste of her Blackness, specifically getting her more comfortable around more Black people, feeling like she had something in common. This very reflection informs us how Ada was thinking about her racial identity and how it signified a turning point in her racial identity development. Through her experiences navigating the foster care system, Ada learned what racial collectivity meant to her, and she carried this into her life in higher education. In the article, she expressed that in her current chapter, she feels the most Black she has ever felt. Okay, and then through understanding Layla, we see how she has grown to reconcile her experience with her parents and how that has informed how she sees her friendships. From her findings, we learn that Layla leads with love and understanding, and this tool that she has developed through her lived experiences with guardianship informs how she navigates her racial identity in higher education. In the article, Layla expressed that she loves being Black. She loves reflecting on her racial identity, and it's something that takes a lot of time. She explained that while being white passing, sometimes there's a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. In those instances, Layla leads with understanding and chooses not to take those situations personal and tries to learn how to be as supportive and effective as possible when she's with other Black folks. If it's non-Black folks misunderstanding her identity, she expressed that it's a matter of educating them that being Black is not monolithic. In reflecting on her early days in college, Layla expressed that when she first got to campus, an on-campus organization helped her meet some of the closest friends that she has in college that very weekend. Since being a student on campus, she has worked for a mentorship program for Black students, and she expressed that it had been an amazing opportunity to work with other Black youth and Black college students. The program helped them work together on what Blackness means for them, asking questions like, What does it mean to be Black in the United States? What is African versus African American? And what does it mean to be trans in the Black community? And what all these different ideas and concepts that fall under, fall within, and without Blackness, what do they mean to them as Black students in higher education? So from her findings, we can see how Layla's ability to find community, a skill that she developed through her foster care and guardianship experiences, we can see how that has served her racial identity development during her time in higher education. Being in community with people who have similar racial identities has contributed to the salience of her racial identity as a Black woman who navigates being white passing. And so Serenity and I spent time discussing how her college experience intersected with her racial identity. She expressed that she was initially excited to come to college because she was going to experience being in a space where there would be more Black people than where she grew up. Serenity expressed that in her life before college, she would most often be the only Black person on a sports team or in a classroom. She expressed that she doesn't feel as if she fits in with her own race and she acknowledged that this might sound weird, but she explains that she grew up in a white family and she grew up in a town that was mostly Hispanic and Caucasian. This experience in her upbringing has influenced her to feel comfortable with every other race except Black people, which she expresses again as really weird, but also acknowledges that this is her normal right now. Upon reflecting on her first year in college, Serenity explained that she has struggled a little bit and she didn't expect herself to struggle at all. Serenity explained that mentally struggling during her time in college had its beginning in high school when she was diagnosed with social anxiety. She was asked in the interview what the university could do to better support her in her endeavors, and her response that while a lot of times she feels like she should be doing things by herself, the program at the university that is focused on supporting former foster youth has been a positive experience when she has used the resources. While being in college has been an adjustment for Serenity, specifically in her racial identity development as a transracial adoptee, her development signifies how Serenity is starting to take lead on her own growth as a young adult. So those were the women of racial identity on the margins, and this is Black Women Finding Homeplace. I just wanted to quickly highlight a portion of my findings from my dissertation because Belle, who you are about to meet, her experiences offer a really important perspective on how the field of higher education is supporting students with foster care experiences. So my dissertation was about understanding racial identity development for Black women college students attending an HBCU. The questions that my research posed were, what are the racialized experiences of Black women college students who are attending an HBCU? How does intersectionality help us understand student development for Black women college students attending an HBCU? And how does the HBCU environment, norms, people, expectations, and structures impact racial identity development of Black women? And so Belle is an undergrad student. She was born in Cameroon and came to the United States when she was 5 years old. She first entered the system when she was 8 years old, and at the time of data collection, Belle was still in the system. Belle was in and out of the system throughout her childhood. She disclosed that she struggles with HIV. When Belle re-entered the system at the age of 15, she was severely sick, and for this reason, that was the final time that Belle would enter the foster care system. In discussing her K-12 experiences, her experience as a first-generation student from Cameroon attending a predominantly white school had its challenges. Belle was stripped of her culture. While she questioned the texture of her hair and the shade of her skin, like other participants who were in predominantly white spaces during their childhood, Belle stopped speaking her first language, and she actively made the effort to assimilate to the predominantly white space that she was in. In sharing her experiences as a student attending an HBCU, Belle explained that the competitive nature of the HBCU environment can impact a student's mental health. She expressed that the HBCU culture pushes its students not to settle for anything less than what they want, and Belle expressed that this competition can be draining because students are never giving themselves enough time to relax. In discussing her identity, Bell took an intersectional approach to describe how she feels about her identity. So in the quote that follows that you see on the screen, Bell explains how her identity operates to motivate her to become a better version of herself. So it reads, "My Blackness is also my womanness. So those two things about me, I can't describe one without the other. I'd say that my Blackness is beautiful. That's the number one thing. The second thing I'd say is that my Blackness pushes me to work harder than anyone around me." And that's like outside of foster care, outside of anything. It just pushes me to be the best version of myself. And then on top of being a woman, it pushes me even harder. So that was the findings of both of the knowledge projects. Something that I have learned along the way of building these bodies of knowledge is asking the participants what their own development has taught them. And I think it's important to understand those reflections and then ask ourselves how we as educators, researchers, and practitioners can support those reflections. And so I wanted to share Layla's reflection on her development, specifically what her foster care experiences has taught her. So it reads, "The importance of forgiveness and also setting boundaries and working within, really trying to understand who you are from within, because at the end of the day, that is what is really going to have the most impact and difference in your life, in how you view the world and how we interact with others." And again, I think something that I always say is like, we don't really have control over some things that happen in our lives or how other people move and do things, but we do have control over how we react and how we carry ourselves. So, I think family is so important, and whatever that means for you, whether it's by blood or not, and finding community is family. Building community and friendship and bond with people who, share similar values and all of that. And so we are at the point where we are going to talk about implications. So beginning with theory-centered implications, I wanted to discuss the importance of the utilization of a Black feminist approach to this work. As you know, my work is set out to convey the complexities of racial identity development for Black women college students with experiences in the foster care system. And these findings highlight a wide variety of commonalities and differences among these young Black women. And this very display of intragroup dynamics offer theory-centered implications. So my first suggestion is the utilization of critical theories that align with the population's identity to best interpret their experiences. The distinguishing themes that these studies were grounded in, such as the power of self-definition, involves Black women crafting identities that empower them. Critical theory houses the assumption that multiple social realities exist simultaneously. In employing theories like Black feminist thought, allows participants to challenge their marginalized status and controlling images around their identities. So in other words, employing critical theories to examine these negotiations of identity gives power to Black women with foster care experiences to have agency over how their identities and experiences are understood. My second implication is employing different methods to collect data that builds community simultaneously. And my example of that is SISTA circles. While semi-structured interviews are a great approach to trace identity development, the participants commonly express the importance of community in their own ways. SISTA Circle methodology was created by Dr. LaToya Johnson, who defines SISTA Circle methodology as a qualitative research methodology and support group for examining the lived experiences of Black women. And the final theory-centered implication that I am posing is using theory to explore intergroup dynamics of identity groups. One of the theoretical purposes of both feminist and anti-racist scholarship that intersectionality aims to address is exposing differences within broad categories of race and gender for women. This research embarked upon this task by focusing on the intersectional differences within the identities and experiences of Black women. Future research that wants to continue to support this theoretical aim of intersectionality should incorporate intersectional approaches in their methodology. And so, implications for practice. I have opportunities for multidimensional healing. The findings of these studies illustrated the stories, the trauma, and the emotions that the participants have carried with them into their lives in higher education. Existing research has shown that reading literary works towards healing and self-exploration has the potential to increase well-being for college students. One of the ways educators can promote healing among students is through curriculum, specifically representation of Black women healing practices. Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, and Audre Lorde, just to name a few, are foundational scholars in this regard. So I pose that educators from K through 12 all the way to post-secondary level think about the ways that they are promoting racial wellness and healing into their daily practices as educators. And then we have facilitating intersectional identity conversations. Ada and Layla both demonstrated the importance of community in carrying themselves through their foster care experiences and reflecting on how they see themselves as Black women. Educators, social workers, and student affairs practitioners alike can create environments that foster intersectional identity conversations among Black women with foster care experiences in hopes to build community for these women to support their racial identity development. Intergroup dialogue is one of the most common social justice education practices being used to foster student engagement across differences in diverse college settings. While intergroup dialogues traditionally consist of people from an array of social identity groups, dialogue practitioners can structure intergroup dialogues or program-based events to support the exploration of a single target group, such as Black women. And so through my research, it was interesting to understand how the participants' foster care experiences intersected with their mental health and when this intersect was more visible in their identity development process. For Serenity, we saw this intersect during major life transitions, like her adoption party and during the period of her life when she was adjusting to college. And for Ada, we saw this intersect serve as a protective mechanism in reflecting on her foster care experiences. And for Belle, we saw how the HBCU environment can impact mental health for their students. Higher education institutions need to not only continue to support the mental health of their students, policies and initiatives need to put in place that support students with foster care experiences and their mental health. While transitional resources are ideal, mental health support that supports the retention of these students is also important for student success. And finally, I am posing policy implications for healthcare services that meet the needs of all of our students. Belle's experience of struggling with HIV posed a few important considerations for policymakers. Throughout the findings, Belle shared how the HBCU environment can be taxing on her mental health. She expressed the need of support. Human immunodeficiency virus / acquired immunodeficiency syndrome is a crisis in the United States, and existing research on this topic has called for campus health practitioners, student affairs educators, and equity-focused professionals to help mitigate the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Understanding HIV/AIDS in the college context is important because existing research has documented that the experiences of people living with HIV/AIDS experience similarly struggles that are discussed around student status as an identity epidemic. And so higher education institutions need to enact policies on campus that will support the livelihood of these students who live with HIV/AIDS. And so I'm going to stop there. I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm going to turn it over to Jenna for some Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Devost. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to some Q&A. So if people have questions, feel free to type those into the chat. Or if you want to come off your mic and speak your questions, you're welcome to do that. I see one here to start us off. They asked, what are your current and upcoming projects? Where will you take this work next?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm hoping that this will turn into a book one day that captures, racial identity for Black women across higher education contexts. But right now, I will be working on a piece that features Belle and her story about racial identity development for a Black woman college student with foster care experiences on the HBCU campus. That's a publication that I hope to develop this year, and also a methodological piece that features intersectionality. Thank you for that question.
All right. The next question, they asked, what are dialogue-based practitioners?
Yeah, so there are people out there in the field of higher education that facilitate intergroup dialogue. Intergroup dialogue, I believe, is a practice that was developed at the University of Michigan, that has students from an array of backgrounds come into a collective space and understand the practice of having a dialogue rather than a debate or an argument. So it's just like a practice that's used in higher education to get students to connect with one another. So there are people out there that are professionally trained to do those types of dialogues, facilitate those types of dialogues among students.
Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions or comments from any people attending? Give it a minute in case anybody has any other further questions or comments. Okay, so here somebody is asking about, so you may have explained this already in talking about your methodology, but during your interview processes, what did those look like? Did you exchange in kind of mutual dialogue? Were there groups of students talking together or individual interviews?
Yeah, so for these knowledge projects, I conducted semi-structured interviews. So it was just me and the participant. And they were actually two parts. So the first interview for racial identity on the margins, I was really getting to know them and asking them their story about the foster care experience. And then the second interview, we actually did a walking interview where I asked them more campus-based questions, asking them what spaces on campus made them feel safe, or what spaces on campus they would go to study and stuff like that. So that was racial identity on the margins. And then Black Women Finding Homeplace, my dissertation, I did two-part semi-structured interviews where I had an interview protocol, but sometimes, the conversation goes where it goes. And so, yeah, the first interview was very informative, trying to get their information and everything. And then the second interview was more in depth, asking them about their racial identity and their experiences on the HBCU campus. Yeah. I'm
Thank you.
looking at the chat real quick. Do you want me to read that one out loud, Jenna?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Jessica Brooks is asking, considering that adoption, kinship, guardianship placement, and foster care are all such different forms of external care, would you ever be interested in research that compares the racial identity development for Black women in each of these groups? Absolutely. There's so many differences within the broader topic of foster care experiences, so I would love to continue, and that's what I intend to do, continue to dive deep into the different experiences within foster care, or even adoption. Adoption is not always experienced through foster care, and so yeah, it's always very interesting to continue diving deep and see what connections are made there within kinship or guardian placement, and then what connections and differences are there within adoption. So absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for the comments. Thank you. There are so many different manifestations. Yeah, continuing to dive deep is something that I always say in my scholarship, because intergroup dynamics is like, that's the purpose of it. And I think we have a lot to learn when we dive deep into these manifestations. So thank you, Jessica.
Well, thank you so much. Are there any final questions? I don't want to cut it short on anybody. Well, thank you so much for your presentation and your time and letting us all hear about your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, we will have the recording and the slides available on the webpage in about a week or so, if anybody wants to be able to access that. Thank you all for being here, and I hope to see you all in November.
Thank you. That was great, Jenna. Thank you so much.